How do you build a high-performing culture? This is Culture Architects. Candid conversations with extraordinary leaders sharing their biggest successes, failures, and lessons learned on their culture journeys. Here's David J. Friedman.
Welcome back to the show with today's guests, father and son Marc and Brian Blaushild of Famous Supply. Last time, Marc and Brian shared their respective journeys to their current leadership positions at Famous and the role that culture has played in their success. Today, they take us through the many different directions the company has grown and how, as leaders, they've managed to keep their people and culture as their number one priority. As I think about where you've been. So it's 90 years of growth and the successes that you've had. Why do you think competitors aren't able to copy what you've been able to do? I mean, you're very transparent. The formula is not a secret. Yeah. Why have you been successful in a way that others haven't?
I would say I remember reading an article years ago, and it happened to be a CEO of a bank. Mm-hmm. And he said that he wouldn't have a problem if he was on a flight and he had his entire, and he called it in a 3-ring binder, I think he said, his entire, strategy and their business plan. And he left the plane and by mistake left it on the seat. Mm-hmm. And then the next person on the flight was one of his competitors. He said, I wouldn't really have that much of an issue because they have to execute on that plan. Mm-hmm. So, we have a strategy not only around culture, but just our entire business and the business units. And Brian's been a big part of working with our teams and our leaders and so many people in the organization to put together that strategy. And, the culture is like the foundation. It's almost like the grout that keeps it all together. Mm-hmm. But we have to execute on the strategy. We still have to do all the things in our business. So I think it's execution and being able to deliver on what we say we're going to do. And that's where the real work comes in every day. And it's getting every individual and all the teams to work together and collaborate, which is part of our culture and core values, to collaborate to really execute on that vision. Yeah. I don't know, Brian, if you have thoughts on that.
Yeah, maybe to kind of take it a different way. I mean, I think there's a lot of companies that have incredible cultures as well, especially in our industry. I mean, our industry, there's a couple of large national players, but there's just so many family-owned businesses that just have wonderful cultures. And some others that we've heard maybe aren't as good or a little toxic. But to your point, it's easier to control the culture when you're smaller. And when you grow, it becomes more challenging. And the concept of growth is a strategy. I mean, some companies might have the strategy of, we have one location and we're going to just keep doing as much as we can out of this location. We don't want to grow that much, but we've chosen a different approach. We do want to grow the company. And part of that is because we think by growing, it'll help our people grow. We can promote from within. We can give people bigger opportunities. And, it's in our people, we've hired a lot of people that are part of that growth mindset, that they want to help us innovate. They want to help us take the company to the next level. It's exciting and it creates enthusiasm. But the challenge to your point is when you're in that growth mode, a lot of companies are in growth mode. They kind of put culture off to the side and it's just, a secondary priority. So we always kind of look at them in tandem, is that if we're going to grow, okay, we're adding a 54th location. Well, that manager can't just be the first person that's qualified to do it. They need to not only be qualified, but we need to be comfortable that they're going to be a cultural leader that's going to make sure that new branch has the exact culture that we want. And we've had scenarios where we've promoted people to be new branch managers that maybe people were like, why do you put that person there? And maybe they didn't realize that we were doing it because we thought from a cultural standpoint, maybe they were a little less qualified. Maybe they didn't have the expertise or the experience of some of the other people that we passed up. But we felt like from a cultural standpoint, they'd be the person that would be able to lead that branch in the future.
Yeah, that makes sense. So given that, I don't remember this, but has much of your growth or any of your growth been from acquisition, or has it all been new branches that you've opened up?
A combination. More of the acquisitions were smaller ones back in, there were some in the 60s, some in the early 80s. most of the growth in the last 10 or 15 years has been opening up new branches and new business units and growing from within.
Mm-hmm. And do you see that as the likely path moving forward, or are there more acquisitions likely?
We're open to acquisitions. It's hard to control that. If we want to open up a branch, we can control that through, obviously finding the real estate and putting the plan together. And we have a pretty nice process now that we just have a team that kind of knows how to execute on all of that because we've done it so many times now. So I think that controlling our culture is better doing it organically.
Makes sense.
I think that if we do make an acquisition, we have to be really careful, on integrating that. And there's little risk. There's, some opportunities there too. But that I think it's more of a challenge with the culture with an acquisition.
Yeah, no question about it, because it's already been formed to some extent, and you've got to find a way to integrate that into it. So you talked a lot about, and Brian, you specifically were talking about the importance of growing your people, and ideally, if they can stay with you forever and retire from you, you've got all the years of their knowledge and expertise. And so I seem to remember you telling me once years ago, or maybe Mark, you told me about, but I have the sense that you've invested pretty heavily in your internal education program, the way people learn and grow. Talk to me a little bit about, so what is that program? If I'm an associate at Famous, what are the formal ways that I have opportunities to grow and learn?
You care if I take this one, Dad?
No, sure.
I would say our training process is one of those things where you want to keep improving it. Mm-hmm. It was something that has always historically been a strength for us in terms of how we promote from within. And as you get bigger and bigger and you're in different states and different regions, what maybe worked 5 or 10 years ago doesn't work today. So we're constantly trying to refresh what we do. We have an online LMS with tons of training courses, and right now we're in the process of building out roadmaps where we can put together customized plans. So if somebody's in the warehouse and they want to get into sales, we can give them a customized track of what courses they need to take to get there. Mm-hmm. So I would say right now it's something that we're going through another refresh, but I think it's going to be one of those things that we're always going to be working on to make sure that we're staying cutting edge with how we give our associates the tools to grow from within.
It's interesting when you talk about that, because almost every article you read these days about what the younger workforce is looking for, beyond just the general idea of culture, so often every article says that the younger employees and younger workforce, they want to grow. They want the opportunity to improve themselves. And those organizations that give them opportunities to grow, they're more likely to stay. Obviously, in those where they feel like there isn't a chance for me to grow, they tend to be, much more transient about. So certainly it sounds like the resources you're putting into that are going to be well placed. They've always been, but even more so with the younger generation that's coming into the workforce.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to the younger generation, I think there's a stigma that a lot of people want to work remote or have, tons of flexibility. And I think to some degree, a lot of people do. And we think that really kind of goes maybe against part of our culture, which is promoting from within. And, I think being in an office, whether it's 5 days a week or 4 days a week, it really allows you to grow because you're learning from the people you work with every day. And, I do believe that, somebody can be incredibly productive working remote. You can get a ton of stuff done. Nobody's going to doubt that. I mean, you have no distractions, and there are a lot of roles where there's some benefits of working remote. But the biggest drawback is it does kind of stagnate you in your career where you're not able to learn or grow from others. And when you talk about the younger generation that wants to grow and learn and be promoted quicker, and a lot of what comes with that is you got to be in the office and you have to be with peers and coworkers, and you need to learn from those and be mentored and coachable. So, we realize that everybody's looking for a different thing in their career, and there's, certain things we offer and certain things we don't. And I think what we've done really well at is finding those younger, hungrier, individuals that really want to grow and learn and don't mind being in an office 5 days a week and, being glued to the person next to them who's done it for 30 years and says, I want to learn as much as I can from you and absorb. And, if they put in that effort, then we're able to, give them those opportunities.
And I think to that point, I think if we think back, Brian, in the last 5 to 10 years, so many people that are open to change, and there is a whole generation of people Some are, they really want to do the same thing year after year and they love it. And we respect that fact. If someone says, I just want to be a truck driver and go out and deliver to our customers, or I just want to be in this department doing this, we love that. But we've been proactive with not like a dozen or 2 dozen. Brian and I could probably do a list off the top of our head between 50 and 100 people in the last 5-10 years that we've moved into different areas and put them on projects or given them opportunities to flip completely from maybe a supply chain to sales, or from product management to here, or marketing to outside sales. I mean, we've done so much of that. And most of the time when we do that, the people have really shined, and we give them opportunities to move back. If it doesn't work, we're saying, well, let's give it a year and a half, 2 years. But most often they continue on, or maybe even go into other areas. So that's really a big part of that personal development that you're talking about. And I think that helps our culture, and it re-energizes our people.
It certainly gives them a greater reason and an opportunity to stay with you, to Brian's point earlier. If we want people to stay with us till retirement and keep that knowledge in-house, the more opportunities like that you provide, the better. So do you have any statistics on what your industry turnover rate is and how that compares to your own?
So, the turnover in our industry typically, and I guess you got to go a little bit more broadly than just wholesale distribution, but in the warehousing and truck driving industry, turnover is substantial. And our goal is to have less turnover than our peers. And a lot of the things it comes down to is being really proactive when it comes to understanding wages in the local markets, and really making sure that we're competitive, but also the flexibility, the culture, the hours. There's certain things that when people go into work and they start at 8 a.m, but they don't know if they're going to end at 5 or 7 or 8 p.m. Those are the type of things that make people leave companies. So it's about us listening and trying to understand and seeing where we can do better and improve. And I'm very happy with how we brought our turnover down substantially, kind of from the pandemic to where we're at today. But we can always get better, and that's our goal.
And I would also say we've used this kind of anecdotal statistic, but it's probably pretty close. We used to say that for every 50 people that we hired that maybe came from our competition, say in the last 10 years or so, or whatever, 15 years, we used to say that, and we'd say, like, did we lose one? And we'd say, yeah, I remember that one person. We did lose one to a competitor. But if we redid that number and go back 15 or 20 years, it might be 75 to 1. Like, I don't even, it's hard for me to think, even Brian, in the last 5, can you think of one person in the last 5 years?
I can think of 2 in the last 5 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think I know of one that, he went to somewhere else and then he went to that, right?
Yeah.
The one in Northeast Ohio.
I was saying the one in Dayton, but yeah, it's very, very few.
Yeah.
I would bet you've probably had people that maybe tested the waters somewhere else and wanted to come back.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I just got a call an hour ago about somebody that left that wants to come back.
Yeah. And depending on how they leave or what, we've been open to that. Sometimes people aren't eligible for rehire, but for the most part, we have good relationships and a lot of trust with our people. We have we don't have like a lot of non-competes. I know a lot of companies do that. There, certain positions, certain things, there may be some trade secrets or something important, but we've really, it's really been based on, them wanting to be here and us wanting them to be here.
One of my favorite books. Have you ever read Stephen M. R. Covey's The Speed of Trust? Have you read that book? Oh, you would love it. It's a great book. So Stephen, the original Stephen Covey, the father, the originator of the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, such a famous book. His son, Stephen M. R. Covey, wrote a book a number of years back called The Speed of Trust. It's a great book that you'd really enjoy. And he talks about he calls it the trust dividend, the benefits when you create trust in an environment. You get speed. You don't have to waste your time double checking everything, dotting your I's and crossing your T's and all the other extra effort that's spent. Because if I don't trust you, I'm going to do all these extra things. But if I trust you, you know what? Let's go. Let's just get things done. We can do a handshake and make things happen. And there's this tremendous speed. And so he demonstrates why trust creates so much speed. But then he does a deeper dive and he looks at what are some of the behaviors that create trust in an environment? And so two of them that I just remember off the top of my head are fundamentals of yours. So one of them is honoring commitments. If you honor your commitments, I trust you. If you don't honor your commitments, you lose trust. But another one, which you referred to earlier, Brian, is transparency. When you're transparent with things, you generate trust. When you don't share things, people start to wonder, what's really going on here? What aren't they telling me? There must be something happening here. But when you're really transparent, it's just much easier to create trust in an environment. And that trust creates tremendous speed. You'd like that book. So,
by the way, I thought Brian would have said yes because he reads about 60 or so books a year.
Is that right? You haven't read that one?
Yeah. Never.
Okay, well, add that to your list.
I didn't know that Stephen Covey had a son that was also an author, but
we do work fast though, and we believe what you are saying because we have trust when we're in the room with our team, and we do act very quickly on things because we do have trust with our people.
Yeah. It makes all the difference.
Feel it.
So talk to me a little bit more about, Brian, you referred to as an element of that transparency, sharing finances, which I've always done in my first and second company as well, and just makes sense to me. So how does that work? I mean, some people might be surprised at that.
Yeah. So what we do is we have a team bonus for the whole company, and how it works is, distributors work on very, thin profit margins. So what we do is, at the end of the year, we look at how much we made, and the first 1.5% the company keeps. And we don't take any. I mean, it goes to paying our taxes, raises, capital investments, buying new trucks, repairing roofs, inventory, AR. But 100% of that goes back reinvested into the business. And then anything over 1.5%, we give a third of the profits back to our associates. Nice. So they know that threshold is that 1.5%. So every month we share, what was the top line and the bottom line for that month. And then we share the year-to-date numbers so people see where we are on a monthly basis.
That's great.
We're also, we do a famous live where we broadcast to the entire company, and we talk about culture, leadership, recognition, and like Brian said, our financials and stories, and a host of things in our strategy. But one of the things we do is we answer questions. We get them ahead of time because it's easier to prepare and have them ready. But we answer 100% of the questions. So we've been doing it for probably over 10 years now, maybe 11, 12 years. And, you probably average each month, it could be 3, 4 questions. Sometimes it's been 6 or 7, depending. So when you add them up, whether it's literally 500, maybe 1,000 questions, but if we had 803 questions, we didn't answer 802. We answered 803. And even if we don't have the right answer, we have to get back or follow up. So there's not a question that any person could ask us that we would not answer. There might be some confidential things that we'll tell them, well, we can't provide this, but we will answer every single question 100% of the time. And it's anonymous. And we've never, if it's a question that is kind of a little bit of a negative tone to it, or maybe an individual was upset about something, we would never say, because it goes through a person that provides it to the person that we get the question from ahead of time. We've never gone and said, who was it that sent us that question? Ever.
The other thing too is we have a complete open door policy, so anybody can talk to anybody at any time. So my dad, me, we both put our cell phones in our email signature. Anybody can call us or text us and send us a message. We'll call them back right away. Neither of us screen our phone calls. So if somebody's in the warehouse and pick a branch and they call and they say, is Mark there? It just rings right to his office and he'll answer the phone. So people know that they can talk to us about anything. And I think that's been a wonderful thing, and it will never go away.
Yeah. Well, and that's the transparency that builds trust. That, if you're accessible and you answer the questions as you're describing, Mark, and you make yourself available and you share the finances, well, why wouldn't I trust that? And you do get tremendous speed from that. I remember in the whole world of open book management, which that sharing of financials is broadly called, and we practiced that again, both my first and second company. I remember years ago hearing an analogy when I first read about open book management, because it just made logical sense to me, like it does to you. And the analogy that the author said is, he said that the way in which we normally do business it would be like, imagine we were playing basketball and we said to our players that at the end of the game, if we win the game, you're all going to get a bonus. But we're not going to tell you what the rules of the game are, and we're not going to tell you what the score is. But when it's over, we'll tell you if you got a bonus or not. And that's kind of how we normally do business, which would be pretty stupid. And yet companies do that all the time. They don't help people understand, how do we make money? What are the things you can do to help contribute to us making money? And how are we doing? And letting you know what your share of it is. And so why wouldn't you want to be that open?
Yeah. Was that Jack Stack? His book,
I think it was. That was where I originally learned it, was Jack Stack and The Great Game of Business.
That was kind of the key, and it was January of 2010 is when we kind of kicked off that change. Because prior to that, my father, it's just the way business was way back when. It was a little more secretive. And when we decided to open up and be transparent, we actually brought the entire company in over 2 Saturdays to a school that was near our distribution center. And we did, I think at the time we had about 300 people at each session. And we really became transparent. I remember putting on the screen the picture of Jack Stack. I think that was the name of Open Management. And we talked about the reasons why and sharing the why. And that's been, I think, a huge part of that transparency. We have to do it.
In our first company, we also, when we hired people, we brought them all through a class that we taught on how to understand our finances, and you had to pass the test in order to be able to get a share of the distribution. So we wanted to make sure that our people were financially literate in plain, simple, down-to-earth English ways, not fancy accounting terms.
Right.
And they can all understand that, but we taught them so that they would understand how to know the numbers. Yeah. So this has been a really interesting. I want to ask you one other question as we come to a close that I've asked most people that I've interviewed and that have been guests on our podcast. And that is that I'll start with you, Mark, and then Brian, you get to think about this as Mark is answering this, because I'm going to ask you the same question. Though Mark has more years under his belt. So you've been at this a long time. You've worked with your father. You've been years in this business. If you were talking to the younger you, and maybe you have a chance to do this because Brian could be sort of like the younger you, but if you were talking to the Mark Blaushild who was 25 years old or 28 years old, and you were sharing some of the wisdom that you have now that you wish you knew back then, what would be the top 1 or 2 pieces of wisdom you would share that you wish the 25 or 28-year-old Mark knew?
Yeah. Well, I have to tell you, I drove to work with my father for the first 2.5, 3 years. And then we drove a little separately, but not every day, but sometimes 5 days a week, 3 days, 2 days. So I had the luxury, and I'd be there with a yellow legal pad and my pen, just jotting down. And we drove, it was an hour to an hour and a half a day, depending on the weather and construction where we commuted to from Cleveland to Akron. So I was getting like this master's of education, and he was sharing wisdom every day. And he shared it with everybody. So there was so much that he was teaching. So we were a beneficiary of that. Our whole company was, the way he kind of expressed himself. But if I was thinking back to myself, a lot of it would probably be, be patient, be patient. I think that sometimes, and Brian's like this too, we want to go. And my father was like that too. In fact, he probably had in some ways less patience than us, but maybe in some ways more. So I think being patient and letting things unfold. And I think as I got older, the timing of things, sometimes it's better to wait a little bit, whether it's in a meeting or some weeks to look at something or maybe even longer, a lot longer to implement something, because you have to have the capacity to get it done with the right people. So sometimes I think maybe moved quickly. And I think when I was younger, I don't think I appreciated some of the people's styles were different. And I can think back to several people that it maybe didn't work out at our company. And I wish I would have kind of embraced them more, because I think they had a lot to offer. I think there were some mistakes made. And I think, changing that and looking at it And that's what we do now. We're always looking at the good in everybody, building on their strengths, getting them in the right positions. I think I wish I would have looked at that a little differently early on. Instead, not judging it as much as really understanding it.
And Brian, you don't have as many years under your belt yet, but
no, it's been 14.
Okay. So in your 14 years in the business, if you were looking at the younger Brian, what would you tell that younger Brian?
Okay. So very similar to my dad when he said patience, because I was thinking slow down. I was just so wanted to make an impact right away that I think I tried to do too much too fast. And then the next would just be try to listen better. Still listening is probably the thing I could improve on the most. And personally, I think I've gotten better, but when I was younger, sometimes I would get an idea and I would run with it, and just slowing down and listening would have been a big help.
Interesting. Yeah. It's interesting. One of the things that I've just observed in my life and career is the almost contradictory things that we have to hold at the same time. So while we have to be patient, we also want to work with a sense of urgency. So patience doesn't mean be slow, but we also don't want to be too fast. And, we want to be thoughtful and planned, but we also want to be flexible about things. And so there's so many places in life, I think, where there are these almost contradictory things that we have to try to balance. And I think speed and having a sense of urgency, we don't want to lose the sense of urgency. And yet, to your point, sometimes you got to slow down and say, time out, take a deep breath. But
I think that's where the fundamentals come in, right? Because sometimes it's talking about getting organized or developing a process and planning. And other time it's about, being a fanatic about response time, just what you're describing. And there's other things. So I think the fundamentals become like that teeter-totter of, not too much here or here, that there is a good balance. And then I think when you have in a company, it's like we can't have everybody in the company that is just like, go, and they're all sales. You have to have the operations side. You have to have people with different skill sets. And when you get everyone with different skill sets, and then we can learn from each other and build off each other's strengths, that's what really makes our culture really work. Yeah.
Well said. Well, I appreciate the two of you sharing this conversation with me. It's remarkable to see a company that, again, is 90 years old, is onto the fourth generation, continues to be as successful and growing in success as you have. Congratulations on that. And I just, I love, Brian, your comments about just keeping culture as your priority, that you were so matter of fact in the way that you answered that question that, no, we're not at risk because we're going to make this a priority, and it is a priority, and we're not going to let go of that. That's a pretty powerful commitment, and certainly would lead one to have certainly it makes, I'm sure, Mark happy, not surprised, but happy to know that as you've passed this on to Brian to be the next torchbearer of the famous way, that it's in good hands, and that the things that you, Jay, and your grandfather started will continue onto the next generation.
Yeah. And all the people around us.
Yeah.
It's really a true team effort. Brian's doing a great job, but we have great people up and down throughout the organization.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you again, both of you, for sharing the wisdom you've learned and the success that you've had with so many other people. We appreciate having you on the podcast.
Thank you. This was fun.
Thanks, David.
And that's it for today's episode of Culture Architects with Marc and Brian Blaushild of Famous Supply. Folks, if you've been enjoying what we do here, make sure to subscribe, and that way you automatically get my latest episodes as soon as they drop. Also, if you have a minute, I'd love it if you left us a review, and that way more culture fans like you can discover the show. See you next time on Culture Architects.
This has been Culture Architects with David J. Friedman. Join us next time for more insights and wisdom from great leaders in all walks of life. To book David for your next event or to learn more about his writing, speaking, or consulting, go to davidjfriedman.com. Culture Architects with David J. Friedman is a production of CultureWise.